to the latest episode of the Lisa Pezik Show. Oh, I'm so excited about this one today. I know if you've been around the block and you've been here with me, you know that a huge piece I talk about is how our business and our life is not separate. And that age old, you don't have a business problem, you have a personal problem that's spilling over into your business. And in this episode, I want to dive right into relationships with your spouse, whether you're now cohabitating in your home, working from home, doing all the things in the home, all up in each other's space that you're not used to. Maybe you're making big business decisions, or maybe little business decisions, new decisions, and you're not on the same wavelength. And then lastly, we're going to talk about sex, baby, because what does that look like in pandemic time? And I'm so honored today to have Joli Hamilton on today. Did I say your name right, Joli?
You did. You
my
did.
Goodness. Normally I always ask before we press record. So, whew. Okay.
You nailed it.
Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Lisa. It's honestly a total honor. I'm super excited to dive into this conversation because this is where my clients, where you're talking about that intersection, this is where we find there's huge growth potential, but also huge potential for pain and the destruction of lives. So we're in a juicy zone right here.
Ooh, and we can't run from it because this is just
cannot.
where we're at, and let's speak to it. Let's, pull back the curtain. Let's bring some awareness to it. And know that if you're listening and you're going, oh God, this is me, this is my marriage, there's no judgment, there's no shame. It's completely normal.
There's no class in love. In high school, we learn algebra, but we don't learn how to be in really stable, loving relationships. It's okay to not know. It's a set of skills. You can totally learn it.
So let me tell you about Joli. She's a research psychologist, best-selling author, ASECT certified sex educator, TEDx speaker, and a sex and relationship coach. She holds a doctorate in depth psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute, spent many years working with clients, helping them improve their relationship skills, and is also a professor of human sexuality. Over the past 2 decades, started a dozen business ventures ranging from clothing design to personal training to providing birth and lactation doula services, all while managing her own relationships, pursuing her graduate degrees, and raising and homeschooling, wait for it, 7 kids. You have felt the wild highs and terrible lows that have come with business ownership, marriage, divorce, and reinventing love from the bottom up. And Joli, I love your mission statement. You're committed to helping women create sustainable, soul-nourishing relationships without sacrificing their career dreams.
That's it.
Okay, so where do we start? In this You lead me where to start in this conversation.
Okay, you know what? We are hopefully moving back into real life, but let's start with, holy wow, what have we just gone through together? If your relationship didn't experience some bumps in the road over the last year plus, I'm wondering whether you were actually in your relationship or whether you had taken a magical sleeping pill and you just snoozed out the pandemic. It's totally normal to have experienced some bumps and bruises over this last year. So let's talk about why that can be so destructive to our bottom line, to our being able to start the business we want to start. You may have had big inspiration during this time. I know I did. I started a new business during this time because I was like, oh, I see a need there. Let me fill it. But there's also this fear and panic that has been going on. So when that enters in, and then you go to turn to your loved partner for that solace and comfort, and they're scared too. And now the world is dealing with stuff, and you need to make business decisions from a place of abundance and satisfaction and fulfillment. Whoa, this is really, really hard. And I think that people don't actually necessarily set themselves up for success because they are trusting the fact that the cultural story of like, okay, we get on the dating escalator and we go along, and after a certain number of dates, we do X, Y, and Z. And eventually we wind up with a proposal and a marriage, and we live together, and then we probably have a kid or two. Or in my case, 7. But but there's this story. And then we use that story to hold us, to create the illusion that there is a way to be married. And there's a set of rules that will just, they'll hold us. So we don't actually have to make agreements. We don't have to negotiate. Hey, how are we going to share power in this relationship? How are we going to handle big emotions in this relationship? What are we going to do about our monogamy? What are we going to do about raising children together? What are we going to do with our money? Deciding those things consciously is not in that one story that we're told. We're told we plan the wedding. What happens next? Be happy. Yeah, good luck. You're just supposed to be happy. But in that, behind the curtain lies really the magic of making a really satisfying relationship that is also a growth experience. I look at relationship as an individuation accelerator. It's your opportunity to go through hard things with another person and continue to grow. And if you want to do that, you're going to have hard conversations before there are emergencies. You want to dive in. So that's what my work is all about. It's about helping people design the relationships that they really, really want. No more cookie cutter, one size fits all stuff. It's just not realistic. It never was, but we have enough freedom and power now, especially you ladies. We finally have enough freedom and power to ask for what we actually want. But we got to decide what that is. We can't wait until there's an emergency or until we want to start a business. Like that's so late in the game. So ideally, you're listening to this thinking, I need to get some of these agreements made. But realistically, most people come to me when they're already in the thick of it and they're like, okay, we're not on the same page. We don't agree on how to share power. We don't actually agree on how we raise our kids. We don't know how to share money well.
Yeah.
What do we do?
When you say share power, like what exactly do you mean by that?
Okay. It's such a good question. I think we overlook how much all relationships are, they include this aspect called power. When we're in business, we recognize this. We own the fact that if we want to have a powerful meeting, then better to have the client come to us, better to have if you want to do a merger and acquisition, you want to be on your home turf, not on theirs. Like we know that.
Right.
So what about when we're in a marriage? If you really believe that there's no will to power there, great, awesome. But that doesn't mean that your partner doesn't. Power is just one of these facts of our existence, especially in American culture. So we might as well acknowledge it and learn how to talk about it. Learn how to talk about what it feels like when you have to negotiate for how you spend money in your house. Maybe one of you makes more money, one makes less. Maybe one of you has always just done the finances, and so you feel ownership over the finances. How do we figure out how to have a conversation? Because that isn't about the money so much as it's about my sense of safety. And my safety is tied to how much, when I say power, I really mean how much autonomy I feel, how much control I feel over my environment. Now you're into everybody's childhood stuff. You're into how your parents ran their relationship. You are in the thick of it. Yeah. It's normal to need some guidance in here. That's the normal thing. It's actually pretty unusual for somebody to be like, yep, we just never had to have those conversations and it's always gone perfectly fine, unless one of you is doormatting.
Yeah, you're shying away and not even having the hard conversation. Yeah. And then when you have to have it, it becomes this blow up. It becomes this building, as you said, this escalation and resentment and, all of that, not fighting fair because you're bringing all this baggage into this one time you finally have the conversation.
Exactly. And we know that resentment is one of those 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Like resentment is coming for you and your long-term happiness. So you really want to get ahead of it. You want to get ahead of resentment by having what you may think of as very difficult conversations, But if you have them at a time when there's not an emergency or there's not an urgent deadline, then you can set yourself up for a really solid conversation. And there are just steps to take. Like something that I teach all of my clients is if you're going to have a hard conversation, first off, plan it. Don't just spur the moment because your partner didn't have a chance. They don't know you want to have that conversation. Plan it. Ask for the time. Set aside an appropriate amount of time, 30 to 90 minutes at least. Make sure that you can do it uninterrupted because one of you may have feelings about sharing personal information in front of your kids. And then follow the HALT guideline. That's make sure nobody's hungry, angry, lonely, or tired before you start having this conversation. If you are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, deal with that first. If that means you have to reschedule, then reschedule. If you just start from there and then have a conversation that is probably going to be crucial to how you move forward, especially if you're making big business decisions, other, like when people decide like, hey, are we going to have another kid? Like there's another big decision. We're impacting the whole relationship. Set yourself up for success by designing the kind of curated conversation that you would design for a client. That's what you would do for them. You would gather yourself together and have a real conversation rather than just assuming that you can, in any car ride, just spring something on your partner. They could be thinking in a totally different zone.
Yeah.
And then you wind up down two different paths. You can get hurt feelings. Yeah.
Yeah. Even the tired thing, it just makes me think about me and my husband. Like he's a very, very early morning riser. But then after like 4 o'clock, there's no important conversations that can happen, after that. And then I'm like the opposite. I get up early more because I kind of just have to in this landscape that we're in now. But my natural tendency is to be a night owl. So if he's trying to have a conversation with me at like 7 a.m. or 6 a.m. or even 9 a.m., I'm like, my brain isn't wired to like dive in and be here with you. So we like lunchtime we'll go on walks, and that's like our noon is like our sweet spot time where like if we need to have a conversation, that is the time that we have found that we're both engaged, present, not hungry, not angry, not lonely, not tired. That was the L.
Yeah, lonely.
Hungry,
People forget about lonely. You can be lonely with a person in the room, right? So if the loneliness need hasn't been met, right? If there's been distance growing, I recommend trying to close that distance a little bit by doing something that you have traditionally found to be generative. Maybe you like a shared experience, going for a walk. Awesome. Like change the scenery, get yourselves into something so that you close that loneliness gap because my gosh, pandemic has been the most crowded yet lonely experience. At least in my house, because you're trying to make a bubble around yourself to do your work, but there's everybody. It's confusing. It's confusing.
Yeah. I love how you said too, having these conversations when there's no deadline.
Yes.
What I get asked a lot is Eric and I, my husband, are very open about sharing that we've both invested in mentors and we've both done personal development and we've both talked to therapists and, we've like really invested in our both personal and business growth to know what we know and do what we do. And we spent a lot of money, like, because you got to pay the best, and that just is what's required when you work with people. You pay them for their lovely expertise and mentoring and services, right? And people will say, "Man, I really want to join this program, or I want to go to counseling. I want to get a counselor. I want to go to therapy if it's not covered. I want to hire this coach or this mentor. I want to join this mastermind." And my husband won't let me do it. I don't know why. I rarely hear the wife won't let me do it. Not to be sexist, but I almost always hear the husband won't let me do it.
I think you're hitting on one of these cultural pieces, right? We have to acknowledge the fact that we are still living out the story of our grandmothers and our mothers, right? And it's still there. And so many of us forget to recognize that how we watched our parents run their relationship or our caregivers, right? Whoever was raising us, how did they run their relationship? That is the inner model we have for relating. So now each of you has this inner model. Now try relating. You may theoretically feel like you have an egalitarian, equal relationship, but if your parents didn't practice, not just not believe in it, but practice that, then there's this unconscious predilection for not leaning that way, right? This is real. So I know in my own case, both my husband and I are really committed to the ideals of being partners and equals.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, both of us grew up in households where ostensibly there was equality, and yet all you had to do was look at what was really going on to say, yeah, there was, except there was also this subtext. And the subtext speaks to you when you're a child and it just seeps into you. So it is not at all uncommon for there to be this, what I think of as a perceived power disparity. It's not necessarily real. It's not even grounded in anything. It gets its foothold in the darkness, in the shadows, the things we didn't talk about. How will we make these decisions? How will we plan for these things? Most people don't make a relationship agreement beforehand. So if they didn't, now you get into it. Now you've got, a kid and a half, and you're trying to make a hard decision, and you don't have a framework for how you make decisions, for how you do this together. And that's where I step in often to people's stories and say, okay, it's okay that you didn't have one, but we're going to need to actually go look at what stories you have for yourself, then co-create an agreement, actually write it down, and then use that framework. And at first it will feel clunky, but that's what's needed. We have to use the clunky framework until it works, which is how we all start our businesses too, right? We start off with okay, I don't know. The expert says, I got to do this. I'm going to get on Facebook Live. And that first Facebook Live is just tragic, but we do it anyways, because we know that if we follow the steps, it's following the steps. And one of the steps is learning how to look into the darkness and see what you're actually doing with your partner, not just what you think you're committed to.
Oh, this is like bringing up even just the next level, like awareness and understanding for me, even though Eric and I have the relationship and this isn't in our relationship, but a lot of times you hear, oh, well, my husband was a jerk and he didn't let me do. But now I'm like, oh no, that's actually okay. That's sad that you didn't get the growth. We talk about the growth you can have together. You didn't get the growth that you needed. But at the same time, how fair is that to your husband if you've never had the question and the agreement, and now you're putting him in a position going, hey, honey, I want to do this, and I got to make this decision by the end of this event or the end of this call or the end of this thing. They have their back against the wall because you never had that conversation or that agreement.
And now they carry this responsibility. And those decisions add up over time to become the fabric of your relationship. And whether you like it or not, that fabric exists. You wove it together. This isn't about good guy, bad guy stuff. This is about what did we actually create together? And I'm a true believer that you can reinvent relationships, because I did it myself. I left my first husband, and it was not clean. It was not clear at all. But I thought that when I started a new relationship, it was going to be more sensible because I thought I knew things. No, I still had to go back to the drawing board and have all these discussions. And that took, so I've been with him for 12 years. And that took the first 6 years to carefully pull apart. I mean, I've been studying this stuff for so long and I had to apply it. So when I work with people, it's from oh no, I did this. I had to figure out what the nuts and bolts of making a relationship work really, really are. Not just the ideas, but then what do I do? What's the step? So my book, Project Relationship, lays out these steps. Here's the assessment. See where you are. And now what's a step you can take to move toward each other in different areas, like money, like sex, like relationship resilience. How are we going to put things in place so that we can come back together when we are having a rift? We need action.
What about the women? I've heard of this happen before too, where it's the husband will say, oh, my, ex-wife had started drinking the Kool-Aid and had this spiritual, awakening. And now all of a sudden she realized we're not right for each other.
Yeah.
Where did the breakdown happen there where you could say, wow, okay, she found herself, but then it's framed that caused the destruction of the marriage?
I have a couple things to say about that. One is marriage is not what we think it is. The history of marriage is not what you think it is. Unless you've really done your studying, you probably think of this traditional marriage idea as being like ages old. But in fact, the way we think of it, the love match that is our helpmate and our best friend and our partner and all the things, this is like maybe 150 years old. Maybe. And the version where women get to share power and actually be equals, 50, maybe. Like I'm 44 and my mother couldn't get her own credit card when she first was married, right? So this is very, very new. So first off, I want to say that the idea that we understand exactly what marriage is part of the problem. We have to actually consciously create our agreements, because it is not uncommon for somebody to drink the Kool-Aid, have an awakening, grow, and for there to be no process in place, for there to be a big growth on one person's part or the other. And it is totally normal for you to be going along in your relationship and you're traveling at the same pace. And then all of a sudden, one person leaps ahead into something new. Holy, whoa, like everything changes for them. And if you don't have a process in place for now, what do we do? What do we do while we're in this transition space? While I don't know whether I have the same values as you do, what do we do? I mean, if you don't have a process, divorce is right there. And it's fairly easy. Even if you consider yourself the kind of person I was, the kind of person who could never in a million years have imagined themselves getting a divorce. And then one day I was, and I see it all the time. Now, I don't actually think divorce is a huge problem. I think that not having a stable environment for yourself to grow is a bigger problem personally. But if you have a process in place where you say, okay, we are now in one of those growth zones. We're gonna now engage the process. Perhaps that's pulling in a coach or a therapist. Perhaps that is turning to your spiritual foundations and saying, what was our original agreement and how can it level up? Not turning to it and saying, how do we get back? Never look back. Just don't. Just forget it. Cut the rearview mirror off in this case. Don't try to go backwards. Instead, look and see, what could your foundation provide you as you grow up, build up. And when you do that, you're going to figure out what your shared values are now. What is your relationship's purpose for each of you now?
Ooh, your relationship's purpose.
Oh, yeah.
Your relationship needs a purpose.
If your relationship has a purpose, then those rocky times all of a sudden are, oh, okay, so this is a rocky time. One of us has experienced, a huge growth. And yet our purpose, what is our purpose? Now, my partner and we wrote a purpose statement. We have a purpose statement, and it includes in it this allowance, this very foundational piece that is, we're more committed to each other's growth than to our own comfort. Ooh. We wrote it right into our marriage vows. And that one is a heavy thing to carry at times, because sometimes I have to watch while he grows and changes. And I'm like, ooh, this feels rocky for me. This is deep breath time. But that was the commitment we made. Now, that doesn't have to be everyone's purpose. I know people whose purpose is, we want to raise our children in a particular way, maybe have a particular faith or a particular investment in a way that they want to be educated or whatever. We want to raise them this way. And we'd like to do it and still be able to stand each other at the end of these next 20, 25 years. That could be your purpose. And maybe you invent a new purpose statement at the end of that college graduation time. I see it all the time. It's not that your purpose statement has to be about growth, but if it does, if you can create a relationship that has an agreement to stand with each other through the turmoils of growth, then honestly, the sky's the limit. You can have an elite level relationship where you actually accelerate your own individuation process and each other's individuation process just by being together in the mix, doing the things. It is not for the faint-hearted. I mean, and I'm still in it myself, but boy, it is something else.
Oh, I love that. So if there's nothing else that you take away from this, that's such a golden nugget, because that stimulates conversation, that stimulates understanding. That's tease up that there are going to be times of discomfort and
Yeah.
oh, that's so
And
so
it can get
so
you on the
good.
team. You want that team mentality.
Yeah.
So many women tell me, I don't feel like I'm on a team. And I'm like, well, did you set up a team?
Hmm.
Or did you just assume that because he was marrying you, he was signing on to the team? Because he might have assumed that you were signing on to his team. What happened there? Where's the team agreement? Show me. If you didn't do that at the foundation, it's not too late. But don't assume that either one of you is wrong, inherently wrong. You have a misunderstanding. You have a
Yeah.
negotiation to go through. You have a process to go through. But it doesn't mean that you're necessarily wrong. This process takes a little while. I usually lead people through a 6-month process to actually get through this and say, okay, now we have agreements, we have explicit communication, we have some processes in place. I teach people how to put the rituals in place. So when they start falling apart, they have a way to come back together. This is what it takes to have a relationship in the modern age that feels like like it's supposed to feel, that the vision feeling we have. This is the work that isn't in the rom-com.
I love, yes, yes, yes. They're not going to make a Hallmark movie about
They're just not.
process.
If anybody wants to write that screenplay, I will happily consult.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Speaking about what's not in the Hallmark movies, let's transition. Well, maybe they are, but they're very PG,
Under
right?
the sheets, right? In the dark.
Yeah, let's dive in. I love that you were like, hey, I'm game to talk about this. Oh, I'm always game to talk about these things because this is real life, people. This is real life. So let's dive into, you said sex is such a juicy topic, no pun intended. And, it can be used for good. It can be weaponized. It can be used for bad. It could be non-existent. It could be, there's expectations. I know even just the very simplest basic when Eric and I just did, what is your love language? Like,
oh, yeah.
So simple. And his was the physical touch. I was like, well, that just makes so much more sense to me about what you need in our relationship and what really brings you, what fills your cup from me. Even just, and that's like superficial basement level stuff. So, okay, where do we go with this conversation?
Okay. First off, almost no one establishes the key, the most essential ingredient to a satisfying sex life up front. And that is a shared vocabulary. What the heck is sex exactly? Like, Lisa, can you define sex? I have sat in rooms full of sex therapists because one of the things I do is train sex therapists, counselors, and educators. And when I sit in rooms full of them and I say, okay, everybody grab that index card and define sex, no two people write down the same thing.
Right.
So now you have this partnership with a person and you never co-define what sex is. I have had clients come into my office who literally do not know whether or how much sex they're having because they've never defined what's sex. If one person doesn't think that oral sex is sex and another person does, you could be having a lot of oral sex and still be claiming a sexless marriage.
Yeah.
Right? It's that kind of conversation. So we need a shared vocabulary, shared definitions right off the bat. This is, now I just had a conversation with somebody who's been married for 25 years and he was like, we have never had that conversation, but I'm telling you, we're having it tonight. So they did. So have it. It's never too late. The other piece of this, I said it's a vocabulary. It's not just about the definition of sex, but the vocabulary. How do you like to have your body talked about? Because so many of us shy away. There's shame tied into sex for so many of us. That is totally typical. I would not say it's normal because I don't want to normalize shame around sex, but I would say it's typical. So if there's shame tied up with something, we often shy away from talking about it. If we shy away from talking about it, now we're left cobbling together our language. And so now we could have a partner using a word for our most intimate areas that really turns us off, but be too squished to feel, how do I say, please don't say that word. I would much rather hear you say this.
Yeah.
So it's a simple conversation to have, but it can feel so awkward. How do you like to have your body talked about? What words are sexy to you and what words are Oh no, do not go there. So in my book, I actually just have a list of these words. If people turn to chapter 8, they're always faced with this list. And I'm like, oh, that is a lot. If you just flip open that in the bookstore, like that list is a lot. But I invite people to like go down that list with each of you with a colored pencil and like circle the words you like and put a cross through words that just make you feel uncomfortable, because that is yours to claim. And then from that, cobble together a shared vocabulary. Now we can figure out how we're going to start to talk about how often we have sex, what it means to have sex, and how do we get the sex we actually want? Okay, because now we're in the pleasure zone and we got to get comfortable in our bodies.
Yeah.
We got to feel like the ability to sink into our bodies. We got to do that while we're raising children and nursing babies and it's a lot. It's okay if it's hard or not hard. In the case of sex, it's okay. It's okay if it's challenging, but ignoring it usually leads to really uncomfortable distances in your relationship. Yeah. It usually either leads to tension. So there's this aggressive tension, or deepening distance where we wind up way far apart. And most of it comes down to missed expectations. Yeah. What were the expectations? We go into people will say to me, I say, so how many times are you having sex a month? And they're like, oh, about normal. And my blank face meets them. And I'm like, how many times would that be? There is no such thing as a normal amount of times.
Right.
There's nothing pathological about wanting a lot of sex. There's nothing pathological about wanting no sex. Mm-hmm. The trouble comes in when we don't get clear on what we want, because then we can't communicate it. And then we have these expectations. So now I can be mad at my partner for not meeting the expectation I have never actually set.
Yeah.
Well, damn.
Yeah.
That's sad.
Yeah. We had a big thing in our relationship where I was just exhausted at the end of the day. Right. And I was just saying no. And then when we opened up and of course there was anger, there was resentment. Yeah. There were all these emotions.
Self-esteem issues.
Yes. And then when we talked about it, and Eric won't mind, like I asked him if I had permission if we were going here to share things, right? And he said yes, that he was like, I feel like you don't love me.
Yeah.
Like I feel rejected. Like I love you and I want to express that with you. And I feel like it's like, you don't want me, you don't love me. And I'm like, oh my God, it's not at all that I don't love you. You know what I mean? Like, so that opened this like huge conversation about like, babe, I'm just tired. Like, that's it. Right. Not at all like, I don't love you. I don't want to be with you. It was like, to him, it was this really deep thing. And to me, it was just like, I'm tired. I'm going to bed.
Totally. And this can happen over just the course of a few weeks. My husband lost his job. He's a corporate guy. He lost his job a few summers ago, and we had sex every day all summer, usually multiple times a day. I was like, first off, I was into it. I think he's amazing. But also I have an awareness of like how his ego might have taken a tumble in losing that job, and how it was maybe helpful for me to point some of that energy, that libido in his direction. So we did. And then September hit and my semester started and life got wild. And we went a few weeks and we had sex like once. And I found him sitting in the rocking chair in my office, just like so down and bedraggled. And he loves this story himself. He's like, it's hysterical. He was down, he's bedraggled, and he starts telling me this story about how like our sex life just isn't the same as it's been. And he doesn't know why. And it's so terrible. And why? And I'm like, dude, look at the calendar. Cause I write it down. I track these things. I'm like, look at the calendar. He's like, oh my God, he doesn't keep track of these things. He didn't see. It had just been a few weeks after a summer of so much joy and passion and meeting. And meanwhile, he'd gotten a job. So now everything was going really well for him in other ways. But we had this ability to talk about it. So we were able to get back on the same page again. Boom. Back on the same page. Okay, cool. Let's come to an agreement about when the next time we're going to have some is.
Yes.
But had we not had that language, had he not said it, he was like down. He was like, this has been going on for months. I don't know what's wrong with me. Maybe it's because I'm in my 50s now. And I'm like, it's just not even true, is actually that like, you're fine.
You run stories when you don't have the conversation.
Exactly. And so that also gave us the opportunity to say, oh yeah, like let's bring this back in. This is an important, that's a foundation piece in our relationship. And we
Mm,
both know that that changes over time. So let's
mm.
have the conversation. So we made a date. We did the hungry, angry, lonely, tired thing. We had the fuller conversation about what we want it to look like when we were both busy again.
Yeah.
And we re-engaged, and we actually picked up a whole new sexual repertoire, because I was like, well, let's just do something new. Let's like reinvigorate. And I happen to have literally all the books on this. So we just added some stuff. And it was actually a huge growth point that we wouldn't have had if we hadn't had those discussions about the discomfort, about the disconnection. Having those disconnection points is an opportunity for growth if we see it that way. But so
Yeah.
often we see it the other way. Like any sign of disconnection is a sign that something's wrong. It's
Yeah.
not. It's just like watching a kid grow. You watch them grow up, they get uncomfortable, they start tripping all over themselves. They're probably having growing pains. They probably don't know where their feet are because they just grew 3 inches.
Yeah.
It's okay. They're going to adjust. You're going to be fine.
Yeah. Now, what about the advice? I've never personally bought into this advice. I'm like either an all in or just not. Like, I don't go with the gray area. Like, I'm either like, yes, baby, let's get it on and go. Or I'm like, no, I'm tired. I'm going to, I love you. I'm tired. I'm going to bed. First thing in the morning, I promise. We're on it.
Yeah.
Like, when I'm not tired, right? We come to that agreement.
Yeah.
But what about I've heard people say, oh, well, even if you don't want to, just start and then you'll eventually get into it. Is that good advice or not great advice?
Okay. This is, I'm gonna say with a caveat that that could be good advice for some people, and that could be terrible advice for other people. There's something called the dual control model of sexual arousal. And the dual control model, it was put out by Bancroft and Jansen, oh goodness, like 20 years ago now, came out of the Kinsey Institute. Emily Nagoski talks about it brilliantly in the book Come As You Are, if you want more info on this. It is, the basic premise is that you have brakes and you have a gas pedal. And some people don't experience spontaneous arousal because their brakes are pressed a little bit heavier than other people. Or they have like, some people have a really sensitive gas pedal, so they get really turned on really easily. And you and your partner probably don't have an exactly aligned brakes and gas pedal. It's in fact really typical for cisgendered, female bodied people to not experience spontaneous, like, I want to do ya energy. That's really, really normal. That's just a way that our bodies are wired. So for some people, the idea of like, I'm just going to start. And in fact, I count myself in this category. I can decide in my mind, I want to feel sexy. So let me lean towards sex. And I will, my body will literally join me on the ride. My mind will join me, and then I'll be all there. For other people, they need to very carefully approach this and set themselves up for that. They may want to be the kind of person who's simmered all day, turn the crock pot on in the morning.
Yes.
You like start sending the gentle, supportive texts in the morning,
Yeah.
and then like ramp them up. Maybe a little sexting happens right before you come home, all the things. But for some people, that just feels like pressure. So this is where it's about figuring out what works in your relationship. Like the simmering it kind of turns me off in some ways, because I'm like, oh, now there's pressure and I feel a little awkward about it. Yeah. But I've had other partners where that worked really, really well. It's just the way this particular partner I have doesn't seem to work. So we do some other things. Yeah. There are so many ways to figure out how you two can get onto your sexual pattern and how it can work for you. But you have to assume that you don't know. You have to assume, like, let me look at this as if my friend was bringing me this problem. What would I tell them to do? Oh, hey, all of a sudden new ideas, because often we're placing the expectation on ourselves that it should be one way. And whatever that way is, we made it up in our heads, probably out of some rom-com somewhere. Yeah. And we made it up. We think it should work that way. And we never do the self-interrogation. Yeah. Where did I get the idea of how sexual arousal works? There are so many models of sexual arousal. It's not just one. There's lots of ways to think about this. We could talk about sexual arousal starting with your words. We could talk about it starting with your ideas, your visualization, your auditory cues. There are so many ways. And there are great hacks for that. Like if you're an auditory person, but you say maybe you don't like visual porn, maybe it just feels a little off to you. I happen to like it, but lots of people don't. There's this great app called Dipsy, and it's all on. It's like porn podcasts. It's just like you just hear the voices, but you don't have the visuals. And it's all got like there's a kind of consent edge in all of it too, which is really cool because we don't get that in a lot of porn.
Yeah.
So for some women, like that's enough. They like listen to a story, like, okay, now I've kind of shifted gears and now I could get there. So we can do something about it. We don't have to pretend that it's going to just happen to us. There's nothing wrong with you if you need to do something to get in the mood. And you don't have to wait for your partner to do it. You can do it yourself. I have pre-gamed many a session.
Me too, sister.
Yeah.
I love it. Oh my goodness. I need to have you back on because I feel like there needs to be like a part 2 conversation because this is just so good and so relevant. And I just love that the underpinning is all about communication. And just setting up those agreements, setting up those discussions, setting up your purpose statement, setting up the words and the languaging that you want to use, have those conversations before you need to have those conversations. And that's such good advice in this time. So good. So how can they get a hold of you? What's the best way to get connected to you?
Yeah. So the best way to find me is to head over to my website. It's jolihamilton.com, Joli Hamilton, like the musical, nice and easy. And from there, you can hop on over and on my resources page, I actually have a few resources. If you're having trouble and you need a little curiosity day, a little fun something to like ramp stuff up, I've got some downloads you can grab from right there and just get your feet wet in a new way of thinking about relationships. I also have a book, which you can find on Amazon called Project Relationship, The Entrepreneur's Action Plan for Passionate, Sustainable Love.
I love that. Thank you so much for being here with me today, Joli.
Thank you for stimulating such an awesome conversation, Lisa. That was fantastic.
Thank you. And listener, thank you for being here with us today. I hope this served you. I hope you'll go back to this. This was just chock full of great tips and secrets and just reminders. Like when you're in the thick of it, you have help. You don't have to navigate this rough patch on your own. You've got Joli, you've got this podcast. I will put in the show notes all of her information so you can get in contact with her. And thank you again for being here. And we'll see you next time on The Lisa Pezik Show.